The screen all lost their pictures and flipped to static. Hey, Marla cried. She banged against the monitor and the image lurched. Disoriented, then sputtered and went out again. She hit it again, and with another spasm of static, the image slowly cleared. As it resolved, the stage appeared. Something's wrong, Lamar said, and all three leaned forward and trying to get a better look. Bonnie, Jason said in a grave tone. Bonnie, Marla echoed, looking at Lamar with alarm. Where's Bonnie? Lamar hit the button on the walkie-talkie. Charlie, he said urgently. Charlie, don't leave the control room. In the control room under the stage, Charlie and Jessica peered at the monitors, gaining first signs of life. It's too dark. I can't see anything on these, Jessica complained. There, Charlie said, pointing. Jessica blinked. I can't see anything, she insisted. It's Carlton, right there. I'm going to get him. No waiting for a response, Charlie crawled toward the exit. Charlie, wait, John said, but she was already out and the door. It slammed shut behind her, and all three of them heard the dull metal thud of the drop lock falling into place. Charlie! John yelled again, but she was already gone. It's bolted shut, John grunted as he pulled on the door. The walkie-talkie sputtered, and Lamar's voice came choppingly from the little box. Charlie, don't leave room. Jessica and John exchanged a glance, and John picked up the radio. Too late, he said, looking to Jessica as he lowered the walkie-talkie. Charlie made her way unsteadily between chairs, but after only moments, she realized she had gotten herself turned around. The lighting had changed. Now a single blinding blue light was strobing on and off above the stage. Over and over, the room flashed, and in a blinding burst like lightning, then it was instantly dark again. Charlie covered her eyes, trying to remember what she had bumped into first. Metal chairs and full party hats pulsed like beacons, on the dark with each burst of light, and Charlie's head began to throb. She squinted, trying to orient herself, but beyond the table surrounding her, all she could see were a thousand after images burned into red retains. She had no idea which way to go to find Carlton. She leaned in against a nearby chair and pressed her hand tightly over her forehead. A table streaked against the floor briefly, and Charlie knew that it hadn't been her. She turned around, but the light had gone dark. When it flashed again, she was looking directly at the stage, where there had been three sets of eyes. She saw only two. Freddie and Chica stared down at her, set their plastic gazes, catching the light. Twinkling with the strobe, their heads seemed to follow her as she moved along the table. Bonnie was gone. Suddenly, she felt exposed, all at once noticing just how many places were in the open room for something to hide. Just how visible she was to anyone, anything that might be watching. She thought briefly of the little control room she had just left and felt a pang of regret. Coming out here might have been very stupid. Another screech sounded, and she rolled around to see the table behind her moving slowly away. She turned to run, but she slammed into something before she could take a step. She jerked her hands up into the darkness and shielded herself and touched the matted fur. The strobe threw its light on again, and this time a garbled noise blared from the gaping mouth in front of her. Bonnie. Bonnie stood only inches from her, his mouth opening and closing rapidly, and his eyes rolling wildly in his head. Charlie jerked away, then backed up slowly. The rabbit did not try to follow, just continued his bizarre and silent indication. His eyes aimlessly recorded into his head. Her foot caught on the leg of a metal folding chair. She fell back, landing hard on her bottom. She started to crawl, staying low, hurrying to get away from Bonnie. A spotlight flashed from a stage, this one clearly aimed at her. She raised her hand to see who was there, but the light blinded her. All she could make out were two sets of following eyes. Charlie screamed and scrambled to her feet. She took off, running, not looking back, and made it across the room and into the hallway that led to Pirate's Cove. She ducked into the bathroom along its wall. The door echoed when it shut behind her. The room was empty, with nothing in it but three sinks and three stalls. Only one of the fluorescent lights was on, and just barely, only enough to color the room dark gray instead of black. The metal walls of the stall dividers looked flimsy, and Charlie had a sudden vision of Bunny, larger than life, grabbing the metal frame with his paws and ripping it up from the ground, the bolts tearing right out of the floor. She banished the thought and ran into the furthest stall from the door, slipping the lock so small and almost delicate into place. She sat on top of the toilet tank, her feet pulled up onto the seat and her back pressed against the blue tile wall of the bathroom. In the empty room, Charlie could hear her own breath echoing. She forced it to slow and close her eyes, telling herself to be silent, to hide. Charlie? John was still pounding on the low door of the control room. Charlie, what's going on out there? Jessica sat quietly, still right out from the screams and crashes outside. She can't take care of herself, John said, easing his grasp on the door. Yeah, Jessica said. He did not turn around to look at her. We have to get out of here, John said. He rattled the door again. The top swayed a little as he pulled, but the bottom was stuck fast. He hunched down farther. There was a lock, a deadbolt that had dropped straight onto the floor. The latch to pull it open had broken off long ago, leaving only a jagged ledge so thin he could scarcely get his fingers around it. As he yanked it upward, it cut into his fingers, leaving thin red lines. The bolt stayed fast in place. Jessica, you try, he said, trying to look at her. Her eyes were on the wall of televisions. They were all showing static, but every now and then one flashed a picture. Never mind, John said. Keep watching. He bent his head again and went back to the deadbolt. In the bathroom, Charlie was silent. She paid attention to each breath she took. Each inhale and exhale, a slow, deliberate process. She had tried meditating once, she had hated it, but now the intense focus on her breathing was calming. I guess I just needed the right motivation, she thought, like staying alive. The stalls rattled briefly, and there was a distant booming sounded that went on for several seconds. It's storming outside. She kept her eyes trained on the floor. The light overhead was so dim it scarcely illuminated her stall. She held her breath. The light flickered and let out a brief hum. Dana was silent. The toilet tank she sat on felt unstable. She scooted to the edge of it to quietly let her foot down. Just as the tip of her shoe touched the towel, the wide bathroom doors opened with a thunderous bang. Without thinking, she jerked her foot up, and the lid of the porcelain tank clanged like pots clattering together. She held herself perfectly still, her shoes suspended in the air, then carefully pulled her foot back into place on top of the toilet seat. That was too loud, she thought. Carefully, she leaned forward and reached up with one hand to grasp the stall divider. She pulled herself up to stand slowly, the seat rocking on its hinges beneath her feet. She peered out over the top at the two stalls next to her. It was too dark to see beyond the middle stalls, and the two row and the whole row of them swayed gently from her weight. There was a shuffling sound. Something white and heavy was sliding across the floor, not trying nearly as hard as she was going to be quiet. Her eyes darted from the stall door beside her to the bathroom door. The shuffling continued, but she did not tell where it was coming from. The sound filled the room. Suddenly, the nebulous sound resolved. It was crisp and it was nearby. The walls she clung to trembled slightly. She panned her gaze around the room, hoping her eyes would adjust a little more. She could make out a trash can by the door and the outline of the sinks. Apprehensively, she looked back at the door of her stall, letting her focus creep along the edges until she set her eyes on the inch-wide gap along the door. A large plastic eye stared back, unblinking and dry, fixed directly on her. Two large and unnatural rabbit ears hung over the top of the door. Shirley clasped her hand over her mouth and jumped to the floor as fast as she could, dropping to her stomach and scooting along the floor onto the second stall. She heard Bonnie rattle the door of the stall she had just left, but the shuffling feet did not move. She crawled under the next divider and into the stall nearest the entrance. This time, her foot bumped the toilet behind her and the lid dropped down with a loud clank. Charlie froze. The shuffling thing did not move for what felt like an age. Charlie felt her breath. He must have heard, but Bonnie still made no sound. Charlie held still and listened, waiting for another sound of movement to mask her own. Her breathing seemed louder than before. She lowered her head, trying to make out shapes along the floor. The shuffling sound resumed, and now, without warning, it was directly in front of her. She held her breath, desperately trying to make out any forms in the darkness. There he is. A large padded foot was just outside the door, as if it had just stopped mid-step. Is he leaving? Please leave, Charlie pleaded. There was a new sound. Stiff fabric, softly crunching. What is that? The foot outside the door had not moved. The noise grew louder. The sound of fabric and fur twisting and stretching, tearing and popping. What is that? Charlie dug into the floor with her nails, holding down a guttural scream. He's bending over. A large paw touching down gently in front of her, then another shape. The creature's head. It was massive, filling the space under the door. Gracefully, Bonnie lowered himself to the floor and turned his head sideways until his eye met Charlie's. His giant mouth was open wide with a ghoulish excitement, as though he had found someone in a game of hide and seek. A warm burst of air rolled into under the stall door. Breath? Shirley clasped her hand over her nose and mouth. The stench was unbearable. Another wave of it hit her face, hotter and more putrid. She closed her eyes and at the point of relinquishment, the hope of escape. Maybe if she kept her eyes closed long enough, she would wake up. Another gust of hot air hit and she jerked back, hitting the back of her head on the toilet. She wriggled in pain and threw her arm in front of her, shielding her face against attack. No attack came. She opened one eye. Where is he? Suddenly, the metal walls around her swayed with a resounding bang. Charlotte startled and covered her head as Bonnie struck again. The walls rocked on their legs, and the bolts stretching as they were yanked free from the floor. The whole assembly seeming ready to collapse. Chili scrambled under the last divider and climbed to her feet, grasping for the floor handle to pull it shut as she ran out. She ran back into the main dining area, down toward the control room. Her eyes no longer adjusted to the light. She ran with her hands in front of her, unable to see further than her next steps. John, she cried, grabbing the doorknob and yanking at it. Pushing, nothing happened. Shirley, it's stuck. John shouted back from inside. As Shirley struggled with the door, she glanced up at the stage. Chica was gone. John, Charlie shouted in desperation, without waiting for a response. Charlie took off again, running for a hall to her left, trying to get as much distance from the bathroom as possible. The hall was almost completely dark, and as she ran, open doorways yawned at her with wide black mouths. Charlie did not stop to look outside any of them, instead only praying that nothing jumped out at her. She reached the last door and paused for a brief moment, hoping against hope that it would be unlocked. She grabbed the knob and twisted. Thankfully, it fell open easily. She slid through the door, then closed it rapidly, trying not to make a sound. She stood watching the door for a long moment, half expecting it to be flung open, and then finally she turned. It was only then that she saw him. Carlton was there, his eyes widened in surprise. Wait, he saw her, but he did not move, and after her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she understood he was trapped, which somehow under the top half of one of the animatronic suits, his head poking out from the wide shoulders of the costume. His face was white and exhausted, and Charlie knew why. The spring locks. She heard her father's voice for a moment. It would snap off your nose. Carlton, Charlie said cautiously, as if her voice alone might set off the mechanisms. Yep, he said, with the same faltering tone. That costume is going to kill you if you move. Thanks, he wheezed, half attempting a laugh. Charlie forced a smile. Well, today's your lucky day. I'm probably the only person who knows how to get you out of that thing alive. Carlton exhaled a long and shaky breath. Lucky me, he said. Charlie knelt at his side, studying the costume for long moments without touching it. These two spring locks at the neck aren't holding anything back, she said at last. He just rigged them to snap and pierce the throat if you try to move. I have to undo these first, and then we can open the back of the costume and get you out. But you can't move, Carlton. Seriously. Yeah, serial killer man explained the not moving to me, he said. Charlie nodded and went back to looking at the costume, trying to devise an approach. Do you know who I'm wearing? Carlton asked, almost casually. What? The costume. Do you know what character it was supposed to be? Charlie studied it. Danielle looked around until she saw the matching head. No, she said, not everything he built was made to the stage. Her fingers suddenly stopped working. Carlton. Charlie carefully surveyed the array of costumes and parts that line in the walls and varying stages of completion. Carlton, she repeated. Is he here? With a new sense of dread, Carlton struggled to get a look behind him without moving. I don't know, he whispered. I don't think so, but I've been kind of in and out. Okay, stop talking. I'll try to work fast, Charlie said. She had the mechanism figured out, or at least she thought she did. Not too fast, Carlton reminded her. Carefully, slowly, she reached into the costume's neck and took hold of the first spring lock, maneuvering it until her fingers were wedged between the lock and Carlton's neck. Careful with that artillery. I've had it once since I was a kid, Carlton said. Shh, Charlie whispered. When Carlton spoke, she could feel his neck move. He was not going to stop the locks by talking, she thought, but the feeling of his tendons moving under her hands was unsettling. Okay, he whispered. Sorry, I talk when I'm nervous. He clamped down his jaw and bit his lips together. Charlie reached down further into the costume's neck and found the trigger. With a stinging snap, the lock sprang almost her hand so hard that it numbed her fingers. One down, she thought as she pulled it, harmless, out of the neck of the costume. She flexed her fingers until the feeling came into them, then crawled over to Carlton's other side and began the process again. She looked over her shoulder from time to time, making sure every costume was still in its place against the wall. His skin was warm under her touch, and even though he was not speaking, she could still feel movement. I feel the life of him. She could feel his pulse against the back of her wrist as she worked, and she blinked back unexpected tears. She swallowed hard and focused on the task. trying to ignore the fact that she was touching someone who would die if she failed him. She worked open the spring lock again, taking the impact in the palm of her hand and pulling the disabled device free of the costume. Carlton took a deep breath in and she startled. Carlton, don't relax. He stiffened and exhaled slowly, his eyes wide and frightened. Right, he said, still a death trap. Stop talking. Charlie pleaded again. She knew exactly how much longer he was still in, and she could not bear to hear him speak now if he was about to die. Okay, she said, almost there. She crawled around behind him where a series of 10 leather and metal fasteners held the back of the costume together. She considered it for a moment. She needed to keep the costume still, exactly how it was, until the last moment. She sat down behind him and bent her knees, positioning herself so that she could hold the costume in place with her legs as she opened it. I didn't know you cared, Carlton wondered, as though attempting to joke together but too tired and too scared to finish it. Charlie didn't answer. One by one, she worked the fasteners free. The leather was stiff, the metal tightly fitted, and each one fought back as she worked, clinging together. When she was halfway up the back of the costume, she felt its weight begin to shift. She gripped it tighter with her knees, holding it together. Finally, she undid the last one and at the nape of his neck. She took a deep breath. That was it. Okay, Carlton, she said. We're almost done. I'm going to open this and throw it forward. When I do, you pull out of it as fast as you can. Okay? 1, 2, 3. She yanked the costume open and thrusted it away with all her strength, and Carlton jerked back from it, top landed roughly onto her. Charlie felt a sharp, quick pain on the back of her hand as she pulled free, but the costume scattered halfway across the room, leaving them clear. A series of snaps sounded, making a noise like fireworks, and they both cried out, leaping back and banging into a heavy metal shelf. Together they watched as the empty costume writhed and twisted across the floor, the animatronic parts snapping violently into place. When it came to a stop, Charlie stared fixated. The thing was just a torso, just an object. Beside her, Carlton let out a low, pained groan, then turned and vomited onto the floor beside him, heaving and reaching like he would be turned inside out. Charlie watched, unsure what to do. She put a hand on his shoulder and kept it where he finished, wiped his mouth, and sat gasping for breath. Are you okay? She said, the words sounding small and ridiculous. Carlton nodded wearily, then winced. Yeah, I'm fine. He said, sorry about the floor. I guess it's your floor, kind of. You might have a concussion. You might have a concussion. Charlie said, alarmed, but he shook his head, moving more slowly this time. No, I don't think so, he said. My head hurts like somebody really hit it hard. I feel sick from being stuck in the room and pondering my death for hours, but I think I'm okay. My mind is okay. Okay, Charlie said doubtfully. Then something he had said finally registered. Carlton, you said serial killer man explained for you not to move. You saw who did this, do you? Carlton got to his knees carefully, then stood, bracing himself into a nearby box. He looked at Charlie. I was trapped in that thing for hours. I am tingly. He stuck out his foot as if to make the point. Did you see who it was? Charlie repeated. Dave the guard, Carlton said. He said it, almost surprised that she did not know. Charlie nodded. She known already. What did he tell you? Not much, Carlton said, but his eyes opened suddenly as if he had just remembered something of grave importance. He looked away from Charlie and slowly dropped to his knees. What is it? Charlie whispered. Do you want to hear? He said. He seemed suddenly calm for someone who had so narrowly escaped death. What is it? She demanded. He glanced nervously at her for a moment, then took a deep breath, his face drowning to white.